Episode 8, 2007. I am not bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I must stand with anybody that stands right, stand with him while he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong.
Now, on Inside the Buffalo...
Wait! Can't use that title. How about this? All right.
Hello, friends. It's time once again for another episode of Down and Drought, your weekly walk down memory lane with the Buffalo Bills and their 17-year playoff absence. Every week, we look at a specific season of the 17-year drought. Our attention turns to 2007. I'm Prescott. Rossi alongside me is Thad Brown, and sitting in the Dave Yates Memorial Chair is now Mark Gruba.
Dave is still alive, though.
Yates is still alive, but it's still a memorial chair. You can have memorials for people that are still living. Fellas, we turn to 2007, and right off the top, January 11th, Willis McGahee to Penthouse magazine, a fine periodical, tells them that the Bills should relocate to Toronto if the NFL wants to expand. And McGahee was always known for saying whatever he truly felt. And coming off an offseason where the Bills, of course, missed the playoffs, to come out and say the Bills should move to Toronto, that's not a good sign.
No, it did not go over well. And I mean, not only did he say whatever he thought, he generally didn't have many things go through his brain before he said whatever he was going to say.
Yes.
It was if there was a shooting fish in the barrel thing you don't say about Buffalo, it's, we don't like to be there because there's nothing to do. That will push Buffalo's buttons right off the bat. And this was one of those things. He backed it up by saying the only thing I do, I don't know if it was that interview or later, that was the Dave and Buster's interview.
Right,
that's all I have to do. So it was like, it's funny when you cover the Bills in Rochester and you don't have the same community angst that people in Buffalo do. Some of these things we kind of roll our eyes at, like, well, yeah, it's Buffalo, but there really isn't a lot to do.
Yeah, we're not Miami, we're not Los Angeles.
Not that you don't want to say it's terrible. It's a nice city and all, but like you said, it's not Miami, it's not Houston, it's not a lot of
New York.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you understand when someone says there's not much to do, you kind of, okay, fine. But in Buffalo, if you have any brain in your mind, in your head, you don't say anything like that.
No, you're right. That was the Dave and Buster's moment.
Yeah.
I think that's how it'll be remembered. The other part about it is, comparing to Toronto, of all places.
Yeah. The inferiority complex,
right,
there are certain
right
notes
there.
you don't want to hit on.
Right, and that definitely, that one struck deep.
So Tuesday, January 16th, Ralph Wilson tells the Buffalo News that when it comes to the contract for Willis McGahee, things like that, his character will play into what they do with McGahee moving forward. McGahee releases a statement saying that the quotes were taken out of context, which I wonder, what context do you mean when you say the Bills should relocate to Toronto? I don't know how you could misconstrue that. And then on March 8th, the Bills trade McGahee to the Ravens for a 3rd and 7th in 2007 and a 3rd-round pick in 2008. So the Bills have been kind of chasing for a great running back since Thurman Thomas. They've had good ones. And now they've gotten rid of another, maybe not the best running back or a top 5 running back in the NFL, but a very good one in Willis McGahee.
And he was good the 3 years before they got rid of him. He was a top, maybe not top 3 or 4 back, but he was certainly in Group 2 and high in Group 2. He was an excellent back. That said, I thought the Bills did pretty good getting 2 third-rounders out of Baltimore for him. But regardless, it was a tough guy to lose.
No, I would agree. I mean, it created a huge hole in that offense. And when you look at what he did for Buffalo, given where he started, the fact that he missed his entire rookie season rehabbing that horrific knee injury, he really turned into a very good NFL running back. And I think there was a lot of doubt about just how good he could be.
And it really shows how much Buffalo and the Bills did not like what he said. And you have to believe that was a big part of what happened. Because the next 2 months, from Willis McGahee's point of view, is total damage control. I mean, everything out of context, everything out of the, I'm trying to walk back the stupid thing I said playbook is what he did for the next 8 weeks. From the Bills' point of view, they gave him no leeway to do that. But when they traded him, it left a huge hole. From that point until the draft, the thinking was Anthony Thomas. Anthony Thomas was going to be the Bills' starting running back. They had nobody at running back at that point.
Yeah, and March 25th, 2 weeks after that trade, in an interview with the Baltimore Sun, McGahee tells them, quote, going to Buffalo was like getting hit by a brick wall. Can't go out, can't do nothing. There's an Applebee's, a TGI Fridays, and they got a Dave & Buster's. They got that, and I'm like, what the? And the women, ... Willis, what are you doing?
There's not going to be a Wall of Fame moment here.
No.
I think that's fair to say.
It was just, and Marv Levy, when he was named general manager, said that the Bills are going to be a team full of high character. No other option for him. They had to get rid of McGahee. And then just to kind of put that little twist of lemon on the end of this, in the middle of all of this with McGahee and the Bills' current running back at the time, their greatest running back of all time, Thurman Thomas, is selected to the Hall of Fame class in 2007. So you just had that little extra twist of the knife digging in deep after Willis McGahee just can't stop running his mouth. And we talked about losses in the offseason of 2007. There are more of them this time on the other side of the ball. A trifecta of big names leaving the Bills' defense. Nate Clements, London Fletcher, and Takeo Spikes. Just how big of a loss, even at that moment, did you recognize those three guys leaving Orchard Park?
Clements was the guy. Clements was a guy who was pretty much still in the prime of his career, an excellent corner. And again, like Willis McGahee on offense, he left them with nobody. They were going Ashton Yabodi was going to be a starter at corner. So, Spikes and Fletcher were both still good players, but and especially with Fletcher, they were both kind of on the back end. They were cap casualties. There was some football sense to, it wasn't the smartest move to bring those guys back. Nate Clements was one of those free agents that the Bills had. They probably should have kept, a lot like Stephon Gilmore this year, and maybe not as good as Gilmore, but certainly of that caliber. Yeah,
I think the thing with Clements was he was a highly sought-after free agent, and this is one of those moments where you talk about, would the Bills be willing to spend for a guy? In this case, they decided not to spend for him. So off to San Francisco he goes, and now you've got a huge hole in that secondary.
8 years, $80 million to the 49ers.
And that was the thing. It was a huge price tag.
The NFL Draft, April 28th and 29th. They're still doing the Saturday-Sunday NFL drafts at this point. And the Bills have the 12th overall pick. They've been linked with Patrick Willis, who goes one pick ahead of them to San Francisco to play with Clements. And the Bills draft Marshawn Lynch. So another running back going in the first round for the Bills during the draft. Not the last one, but just your thought, fellas, on getting Lynch in the first round.
It was a little bit of a surprise, but I wasn't overly blown away by it. Again, they had nobody. They needed someone.
Yeah, this was about addressing a need. They felt like he was the best guy available at that point. It's interesting because he was a good running back at Cal. I don't think we realized, and I think it took a while to realize just how tough he was. Really what kind of back he was. And the shame of it was, if you really kind of want to go big picture on Marshawn, he never really had the chance to play on a great team in Buffalo to really see what he could do.
He was the 12th pick in the draft. The second running back taken
was Adrian Peterson.
Well, right, and he exceeded those things. That's pretty lofty, draft status. 12th pick overall, number 2 running back, especially in that era where it was still it wasn't quite the quarterback era yet. And he was better than advertised with those two spots. And again, the Bills had needs at corner. They were thinking about that as well. But in the run-up to that draft, Michael Turner, the backup running back in San Diego, was on the trade block, and Buffalo was hot and heavy involved in that right up until draft day. So it wasn't a shock. I don't think anyone here was overly excited by Marshawn Lynch. Again, it filled the need, but Peterson was the star running back of that draft, and they didn't get that guy. So whatever, we'll move on. It's a first-round pick.
Then in the second round, the Bills trade a second-rounder and a third-rounder to move up 9 spots, where they draft Paul Posluszny. And Marv Levy even said in the aftermath of that draft that they had thought about taking Posluszny with the 12th overall pick. Now they get him at 34. I have to imagine 2 home runs with your first 2 picks. Maybe not necessarily at that moment, but definitely in hindsight.
I don't know about home runs, but they were definitely solid picks.
Solid picks. Yeah. Maybe home run goes a bit too far, but look, those guys did what they were brought in to do. Each one of them plugged an important need on their side of the ball.
And both were expected to. It wasn't like that we thought that the Bills were reaching with either pick. They were solid picks. They weren't, let's print up the playoff tickets picks, but they were good enough.
And the third-round pick is Trent Edwards, the quarterback out of Stanford. So the Bills are addressing areas of need, though they've had bigger losses than they've had additions.
And the big thing with that Edwards pick was how much Bill Walsh had pushed his abilities to teams that were looking for quarterbacks at that stage of the draft. Walsh had a big hand in him being drafted because he really sold his virtues as a quarterback. And I think, the right people, the Marv Levys of the world, were listening.
Well, the Marv Levy was kind of a Bill Walsh peer from that era,
right.
So he's going to respect things that Bill Walsh, not that you shouldn't, but especially someone from that era. And I think the reaction in Western New York was, okay, a third-round quarterback, we'll see. J.P. Losman had done nothing to convince anyone he should be the long-term answer, but no one was looking at a third-round quarterback thinking, okay, this is going to be our guy, especially that season.
That addresses some of their needs. The other need that they have is on the offensive line, and in free agency, the Bills signed Derek Dockery, Langston Walker, and Jason Whittle, each of them to large contracts. Whittle not so much, but the other two especially large contracts. And we're seeing now the circumstance or the consequences of the Bills not being successful and kind of having this idea that they're maybe a cheap organization where now they have to spend on players that are good but not necessarily great to bring them into Orchard Park. You have, the McGahees of the world touting out about how boring Buffalo is. Now the Bills are really facing this uphill climb. Fellas, what did you think about Derek Dockery and Langston Walker being players that they would address for the offensive line to go along with Jason Peters?
Lots of money.
Yeah,
big money.
And Dockery, I think, really was the one that disappointed there because I think they expected him to come in and play at a really high level, and that just never materialized. And I have to say, from my perspective, Walker is largely forgotten. That's how little an impact he ended up having.
5 years, $25 million for Walker. 7 years, $49 million for Derek Dockery, the highest paid Bill in 2007.
Both guys, filled needs. You looked at him and said, okay, this guy fits here, and the Bills need a guy here, and this guy is, Dockery was the best offensive lineman on the market.
That's
Walker
right.
might have been the third or fourth. He was up there too. So relative to that season, you looked at those signings and thought, okay, this makes sense. But the contracts were big, and neither guy had been talented enough by themselves to think this is going to completely change how good our offensive line is. You kind of hoped. It wasn't we're going to bring these two guys in and fix the offensive line. We're going to pay $75 million and hope they fix our offensive line. By the way, I think Derek Dockery might have been the biggest human being I've ever interviewed.
He was a large man.
He was 6'7", 350, something like that. I mean, he was
He was up there. Yeah.
What do you think the contract? I mean, it was as large a person as I've talked to.
Bigger than Mike Williams?
Yes.
To me,
yes.
I've never interviewed Mike Williams, but seeing the video of him and seeing him standing next to Ralph Wilson in his 80s, you just go, Mike Williams is a massive human being.
Mike Williams was more cuddly teddy bear. There's a little more roundness to him. Derek Dockery was
he was chiseled out of stone.
He was a tree trunk.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, and he was a redwood tree trunk.
Yeah, Mike Williams he's marbled,
Yeah.
So while the Bills are making these moves during the offseason, meanwhile in the division, the New England Patriots are becoming a super team. And do you have any memories of that offseason in 07? Thinking okay, some of these moves kind of in a vacuum are okay for the Bills, but you don't even have to leave the division and see a team that's just doing everything better than you are right now.
You can go first on this one.
Well, I mean, I think, Welker, we had a front row seat for what he could do and what his potential might be. You just kind of felt like he was a Belichick kind of guy. And Moss, you start conjuring up images of what was going to happen between Tom Brady and Randy Moss. Obviously, there was a lot of baggage coming in from Oakland, and that's how they were able to get him. But you just knew if you could get him focused, that was going to be a dynamic combination.
I had my questions about Randy Moss. You knew if that would hit, it would hit super big.
Yeah.
To me, the bigger move was Wes Welker. After seeing him play a season and change in Miami, what he did, when he went to New England, the moment that trade happened, I remember, just thinking in the sports office that this is going to be perfect for the Patriots. He's going to catch 1,000 balls and be everything they want him to be. And you think about who they are now with the Danny Amendolas and the Julian Edelmans of the world. That is their wide receiver prototype. And they just kept on hitting that over and over. It was Welker who did it first.
Those weren't the only two guys that the Patriots added in 07. Sammy Morris, Dante Stallworth, Adelos Thomas, Larry Izzo, Troy Brown, all along with guys like Junior Seau and Asante Samuel. This team is stacked on both sides of the ball. Now for the Bills in training camp 2007, Lynch and Poz right away, getting starters reps right from the beginning of training camp. Darwin Walker, who was a piece in the Takeo Spikes trade, he was coming back to Buffalo from Philadelphia, never even reports. So the Bills lose Takeo Spikes for a fifth-round pick in 2008 via Chicago, not even from Philadelphia. The other thing from training camp that stood out to me, Fred Jackson beats out Shawn Williams for the backup running back role. And we mentioned him briefly in 2006, but just very early memories of Fred Jackson.
Not much, because the backup running back job, especially when you have a first-round pick as the starter, is not something that's really gaining headlines in training camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I just kind of developed a soft spot for him in a way a lot of fans did. That tiny Division III co-college. There was the Levy connection that way, and he just was kind of the kind of guy you rooted for.
Yeah.
And there's another guy that's going to play a role here this season. We'll talk about George Wilson was another guy that you just kind of rooted for. You saw them do good things in practice, and you thought, boy, it'd be great if that guy got a chance. And well, increasingly for Fred, it started to happen.
Saturday, August 4th, Thurman Thomas inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Were either of you fellas in Canton for that, or just any memories from that weekend?
You know, just thinking, you know, deserving honor. You know, my stronger memories are when Kelly went in. You know, I think that speech was so poignant. You know, just to me, you know, for Thurman, it was just, here's a guy taking his rightful place among the greats. He could not have done any more for this franchise, you know, in his time there. And, you know, there's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame. He was one of the best.
You think about that Bills group and the personalities that went to the Hall of Fame and the super large egos that created the bickering Bills at first and eventually led to 4 Super Bowls. Of that group, Thurman might have been the most reserved. You know, you think about the Hall of Fame inductions, Jim Kelly as emotional. You know, Bruce Smith was a larger-than-life guy. Andre Reed kind of had an angst to him. You know, Marv Levy was the coach. Bill Polian was the architect. Of the group, Thurman Thomas might have been the least notable. Hardly, you know, to say he's unnotable, but of that, you know, group of guys, you know, Thurman was kind of the normal one, if there was such a thing.
Yeah.
Start of the 2007 season, September 9th, the Bills host the Denver Broncos. The only thing that needs to be discussed from this game is Kevin Everett. And fellas, just what you saw in that moment in Ralph Wilson Stadium right at the start of the second half as he suffers a catastrophic injury. The
unique thing about it is you see a lot of football injuries like that where a guy's on the ground, they bring out the headboard, and you're concerned, but 90 to 95% of them seem to end up with, you know, he gives the thumbs up and they take him off the field and the guy's fine in an hour and a half, or fine relatively. And you know, in that case, because you've seen so many, you expect that to happen again. And, you know, this did not happen right away. But still, you know, I remember talking to Dave Yates was on the field for that game, and he said that while it's happening, you don't think this is a guy that's going to be paralyzed. You think it's just another, they're doing their precautions, being careful, and he'll be okay.
Yeah. To me, and I was there that day as well, the thing about it was you could tell immediately he never moved. You know, there was like a slight movement as he was sort of settling to the turf, and then he did not move. And then the other thing you remember, of course, the ambulance coming out onto the field was how long it took. That place went silent, and it just seemed like it took forever to get him up off that field onto that gurney and then up into the ambulance and wheeled out of the stadium. And obviously at that point everybody knew, had an inkling of this is serious. This is very serious, because just the time and the care they were taking. It wasn't, you know, this was kind of on the, as I remember it, sort of in that era where we were beginning to take extra care with athletes when they were hurt like this. You know, that was not the norm, as I recall, sort of at that point. And this took a long time, and it just made you think, I don't know, I just don't have a good feeling about this. And of course, obviously, we found out very quickly that there was good reason for that.
And why it took so long on the field, because there were some unique medical procedures going on at that point to, you know, try and save his functionality.
The next day, his doctor says it's a severe cervical injury that damaged his spinal cord and a 5 to 10% chance of recovery. Sitting in the media room at One Bills Drive, hearing that information, I have to imagine just your heart, everything just sinks.
Was it right after the game when they talked about that?
It was the next day.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay,
yeah. I think after the game there was a pall over the locker room. You know, that you know, again, everything sort of seemed to fall, you know, cast aside, you know, with sort of, you know, Everett's condition being sort of the focal point.
Yeah, the Broncos win this game. It's irrelevant.
It really becomes a footnote. And
even though the game was, you know, I think the Broncos
close. Last second field goal.
They had to run their field goal team on the field with the clock running to get a field goal off.
That is correct. That is how that game ended.
the game, you know, the game itself would have been something we would have talked about in any other circumstance.
But and I remember the whole feel in the stadium was different after that injury, and with good reason. But yes, in the following days, you know, the way this thing evolved, it obviously ultimately transcended sports. It became the kind of story that everyone was paying attention to, wondering what was going to happen with this football player from Buffalo.
And in the media, I mean, how did you cover it, not only the day of, but in the days following that? Because every day you're looking for updates on Kevin Everett's status.
Yeah, and I would say, again, you know, to use a TV term, it became an A-block story. You were in the top of the newscast every day with an update on what was going on with him. And what was fascinating about this, and Thad, you mentioned it, you know, was what was done to Kevin Everett that essentially changed his life. You know, this cooling method that they used to get those coolants into his bloodstream immediately on the field. You know, this is something we had never heard of before that. This was revolutionary stuff. It was Andrew Cappuccino, the team doctor, that, you know, rushed onto the field that day, and they had trained for this. They had prepared for this type of moment but had never enacted it, had never done it. It was purely a training exercise. And in that moment, he took that, how else to put it, but a sort of body-saving measure, and then a miracle unfolded before our eyes.
You think about what that game, that started with a simple kickoff, a football play, and then transcended into an injury. Then it transcended into eventually, almost miraculous overcoming of an injury. And from there, it even transcended another level to a breakthrough medical procedure. This was started as a football play and became something that, the medical profession would talk about for weeks and months and years afterward about how this man's, movement and arms and legs were saved.
2 days later, Everett regains voluntary movement in his arms and legs. And you're already seeing, from hearing 5 to 10% chance of recovery, you're seeing just kind of the miracles of modern science in real time. I can only imagine how, to look at this and be totally amazed and then also have to, put football in the back of your mind. What was, I guess you guys touched on that, of just the
full sense of disbelief.
Yeah.
Like that.
How do you comprehend all
There was
this?
a Hollywood component to it. Like, how could this be happening this way?
And every day, it seemed like every day, like the best case scenario was the announcement.
Yes.
This was great. This is. We can't believe this is happening. We can't. Every day it was something good coming out of that story.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see where you're going to go with this, because obviously, it culminates with him. We're seeing him standing and walking.
Yeah, I mean that we'll talk on that later in the season in the Bills game against the New York Giants.
Yeah.
But a lot of games happen before then, and the Bills do have to play football games a week later. They go to Pittsburgh and get their doors blown off. They lose 26-3 to the Steelers. Losman calls out the play calling after the game, and JP, after back-to-back years of poor play, to say it's someone else's fault didn't go over very well in the media. And just all the columns, the reports that I've found, everybody's just tearing into JP Losman. When did you get a sense that there was, or did you ever get a sense that there was going to be a shift from Losman now to this third-round pick, Trent Edwards?
I don't think it was that early, because no one really bought into Edwards as a viable option, especially not soon. He was a third-round quarterback, So
even after Losman's struggles?
I mean, at some point they had to do something, obviously. But at that point, they had still invested, essentially a first-round pick, or really two first-round picks into JP Losman. Mm-hmm. So there was still a commitment there. They were going to, give him every chance. And I remember that whole week, it was all about Kevin Everett, and it was almost like not a surprise that Buffalo just no-showed the game, because you really couldn't expect them to be concentrating overly on football that week.
Right, and and going back to JP, look, there was a sense of inevitability about this, that it was not going to work out. I was going to say kiddingly, rookie camp. That's when the whispers began. Like, we've got another quarterbacking option. Yeah. Let's see how good this guy is. He's a bright guy. He's from Stanford. Bill Walsh loves him. Let's see what he can do. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I think we thought about a guy like Edwards was he did seem to demonstrate accuracy, which is one thing obviously that JP struggled with, and a sense of being able to kind of command the offense. And I don't know that anybody thought he was going to be the solution, but an alternative may be worth considering, and obviously the coaching staff agreed.
JP's rope was not going to be very long that year, but I don't know if you heard this, but in doing research for this, when Edwards was drafted, the quarterback's coach, Turk Schoenert, talked about him. He said all kinds of good things. You know what one of the things he said about Trent Edwards? When he was drafted, he knows how to hit his checkdowns. When he was drafted. How great is that?
That's pretty good.
How great is that?
Oh, man. So week 3, the Bills are 0-2, and they travel to Gillette, to Foxborough to take on the New England Patriots. And this comes 10 days after Bill Belichick is fined $500,000. The Patriots are fined $250,000 and lose a first-round pick for Spygate. Now, Mark, you and I, the media is a small world. And you'd be surprised how many people that come in and out of your life when you work in media that end up going to different locations. Yeah. At this time, in 2007, I am a junior at Boston University, interning at the NBC affiliate in Boston, WHDH. And this producer that I worked with all the time in Boston was a man named Fred Nutter. Shout out to Fred.
Yes.
He used to be your coworker in Hartford.
That's right.
It's just kind of funny how our worlds have crossed paths because of this 1 degree of separation.
That's
Fred
it.
Nutter.
Fred's the connection. Yeah, Fred and I worked together at WVIT in Hartford. And, he was a great guy. Had a lot of fun with him. Then he moved on to Boston. And Yeah, when we first met, you said, yeah, Fred Nutter. I said, Freddie.
That's
You
right.
know? He was great, and obviously you guys had a front row seat for a rocket ride with that team.
Yeah, and so because of that, in 2007, interning in Boston, that was maybe the most incredible time to be an intern ever. The Patriots go 18-1 this year. Spoiler alert. The Red Sox win the World Series. The Celtics start their run with the new big three of Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, and KG. So everything is great in Boston sports. And now here I am 10 years later talking about a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 17 years. So not everybody wins. But I remember watching that 07 Patriots team, watching them just scorch the earth every single week, putting up 35 points or more pretty much for 10 straight weeks to open the season. Week 3 in New England, the Bills go to Foxborough. Were either of you there, fellas? And just memories as JP Losman gets injured in this game, so in comes Trent Edwards. The Patriots win 38-7, and the Bills are 0-3 with only 24 points scored.
The Vince Wilfork hit on JP was dirty for sure. I hesitate to say this, but I wonder how many Bills fans, you don't want to see a guy get hurt, but JP has certainly outlived his usefulness and his interest, at least not usefulness, but interest in Buffalo. So, people who want to see Trent Edwards, and they always say that the backup quarterback is every fan's favorite, they were going to get their chance.
Yeah, I remember I called it a cheap shot on the air at the time, and I remember I got a pointed email from the secretary of Bill Destler over at RIT, who was a huge Patriot fan, and taking me to task that it was not a cheap play, and I thought, well, I was kind in the response, but I thought, double check the tape. I kind of went in with the arm there, and it was well after the fact.
Vince Wilfork was fined for that hit on Losman, but now in comes Trent Edwards. Paul Posluszny breaks his arm in that loss in New England as well. So your rookie, your second-round pick that you traded for is now done for the year after 3 games. Week 4. Trent Edwards comes in his first start, 22 of 28, 234 yards and a touchdown. The Bills win 17-14 over the Jets.
That's right.
Quarterback controversy, yeah, maybe.
JP was still hurt then, so you didn't have to worry about it then. But you saw what was coming down the pike. I mean,
Losman says he's not. Yeah, Losman says he's not concerned about losing his job.
Right.
It's because of a knee injury. Then week 5, it's the Monday night game that a lot of people remember. It's maybe not the primetime game against the Cowboys or the primetime game that everyone thinks of about the Bills in the drought, but week 5, Monday Night Football in Orchard Park, in come the Dallas Cowboys.
The funny thing is that my wife gave birth to our daughter on Saturday before that game. So I'm in a hospital.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm in a hospital, and we came home on that Monday, and as anyone who has kids will tell you, the first few hours is just a whirlwind of like, oh, what have I done? So by the time I flipped the game on, it was 24-23. I had no idea the hijinks that had happened in that game. The multiple defensive touchdowns. The Bills are winning. Good for them. I saw the last 3 plays and the field goal, and went to bed hoping to get 2 hours of sleep, and that's all I remember from that game.
You got 2 hours of sleep that night. You did pretty well.
Yeah, exactly.
I was there that night, and I will tell you, it's as electric as I've ever felt the Ralph. That place was so amped up for that game that night. Cowboys coming to town, Tony Romo. Could the Bills find a way to get? They were. I believe they were like a 16-point or 11-point underdog in that game. On their field, Monday Night Football, and Buffalo had been starving for a primetime opportunity. We talk about the drought and how few opportunities they had to even play before a national audience.
And then when they did, they'd get crushed.
But here was a great opportunity, and there were so many fascinating things that happened in that game. And I mentioned George Wilson earlier, and he got the ball rolling.
Yeah, I was just going to say, George Wilson, Chris Kelsay, each with a pick 6 in this game. The Bills force 6 turnovers from Tony Romo. Did you ever think in your life it would have the outcome that it did?
No one could have written this script at the end of this game.
You were there. Just what happened?
Well, right. The Cowboys, find a way to get into it. They get a touchdown to Patrick Creighton with 20 seconds left.
Yeah.
The onside kick, they recover it, get into field goal range. Nick Folk, kicks the field goal. He's been iced. He's got to do it again, and drills a 53-yarder, back-to-back 50-yarders. And they win the game.
The other thing about that, too, is that after the Cowboys get the onside kick, Romo hits Terrell Owens for like a 20-yard play that is called in bounds. And you're just thinking, how did this happen in like 3 plays? They went from up 8 to now they're dead.
Right.
And the Bills catch a break, and it gets overturned on replay, and they still lose the darn game. If you wanted to make a list of most droughtiest games ever.
This is what I was going to ask next.
In the top 5 for sure.
I was going to say, where does this one rank over 17
maybe
years?
Maybe top 3. I mean, I think the number 1 game has to be the Pittsburgh game, end of 2004, that cost them the playoffs.
Yeah, okay.
But after that, can you think of a
No,
game?
I would agree.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of a microcosm of the whole thing you're talking about here.
Yeah.
You know, where there's that Charlie Brown effect. Like, here we go. Oh, we got a little window, a little sunlight, and then boom, the rain comes in.
I was just trying to think off the top of my head of just other games from the drought.
The Dolphins 21-0, the loss they blew. The JP fumbles with the ball in their own 20 against the Jets, where the Jets run it back. That was like the end of 2008, or that might have been the next year. The
loss against the Dolphins early in the drought, where they blow a lead. I think it was they gave up 21 points in the final 3 minutes. of the game
that was the one. That was the one I was talking about before.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the one with Losman, where to 3 touchdowns to Evans in the first quarter. And
there's 2 of those?
Yeah,
okay,
the Bills have 2 crushing losses to the Dolphins.
I would go with the Losman one first. The 3 to Evans. The Chad Morton 2 kickoff return games is in there.
The Jet game, that's right. That's right. You're right.
Bledsoe's first game.
That's right.
The Jaguars game where they gave up 2 4th downs on week 1 to lose. But,
there's a lot to pick from.
Yeah, exactly. Of all of those, I would not put any one of them in front of this Dallas game.
I would agree. And the other thing you got to remember that game that night was that was Wade Phillips' return to Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. A lot of storylines.
Yeah, and I remember being with him interviewing him in the tunnel there after the game, outside the locker rooms, and you could just tell he was holding it back, but how much it meant to him. I think even he was in disbelief that it actually played out the way it did, but you could tell how satisfied he was.
Well, and you think about his defense only gave up 3 points in that game.
Yeah.
The 3 Bills touchdowns were all non-offensive.
Right. The Wilson return, Kelsey in the end zone, and
McGahee has a 103-yard kickoff return this one too.
That's right.
Everything goes right for the Bills. They control everything about it, and they still can't
find a way to lose. They found a way to lose.
They snatch a loss from the jaws of victory. So the Bills go into the bye week at 1-4, and in the bye week, for the first time that I've found, the Bills and Toronto are directly linked. The Bills asked for approval by the NFL in Erie County to play a preseason and a regular season game in Toronto in 2009. And we'll talk more about the Toronto series down the road, but just that immediate thought of, wait a minute, now they are actually looking at Toronto as an alternative to Buffalo.
See, this might be another spot for me where the Rochester-Buffalo disconnect might come in. On the one hand, for sure, it scared you, because you did not want to see the Bills go to Toronto. You wanted to see this team remain in Western New York. But for someone that drives an hour and a half to every Bills game, no matter where it is, at minimum, to think, okay, now I'm just driving a little further to Toronto, 1 game a year, if this would give the Bills enough revenue to keep them in Buffalo, even 7 times out of 8 a season, I was going to sign up for it. Now, obviously, if you've lived in Buffalo, it is one of the worst things ever.
A non-starter.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I always looked at this from the perspective of losing, a home game for your home fan base, and that true home field advantage. To me, I know it's a business. Obviously, you got to make the money to have the team. But, from a sports standpoint, the idea of surrendering a home game, at some point in your season that could end up being a make or break moment for your team, I just never understood that. I still don't understand it.
The joke was always, it's not going to matter anyway.
Well,
it's
that's
the Bills.
true. That's true. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
So the Bills come out of the bye week and catch lightning in a bottle. They win 4 straight games. They beat the Ravens, the Jets again, Cincinnati, then in Miami. Now Losman and Edwards trade starting roles. Edward injures his wrist during this stretch. But the Bills win 4 straight games to go above 500, to go to 5-4, their longest winning streak since 2004. So, looking at it in hindsight and, from a distance, the 2007 Bills are not a good team. But the fact that they're 10 weeks in and they're 5-4, were there actual thoughts of playoffs at all during this stretch?
Sure. At least from a week-to-week soap opera standpoint, absolutely. You're doing the figuring. Where are the other teams at, and could they possibly find a way? Look, that team, this 2007 team was a terrible team offensively. They struggled to score points. But that defense, even in spite of all that they lost during the offseason, Perry Fuel, and obviously Drought had a heavy hand in that. That defense actually played pretty well that year and kept them in a lot. Like that Jet game was a 3-3 game going into the fourth quarter. Yeah. Probably set the sport back a year or two. But the defense gave them an opportunity to get a touchdown and win a ball game. And I think that was part of what was going on during that stretch.
That was a group that, Terrence McGahee was a guy who came in and played okay at corner. Angelo Crowell was a guy who stepped up at linebacker. They found guys to make that defense functional. There aren't many numbers. You look at the numbers, they're like 18th overall, 20th, whatever. But they were good enough to make themselves competitive. That 4-game stretch, I mean, they beat an 0-8 Dolphins team, a 2-5 Bengals team. The Jets won 4 games that year, so they were taking advantage of the lower rungs of the NFL. But that's how you build up 4-game win streaks in the NFL.
And what were your thoughts of your interactions with those guys that, they weren't the Spikes of recent years, they weren't Clements, but guys like Coy Wire and you mentioned Crowell as well. What was it like interacting with those guys that weren't the stars of the Bills defense, but were playing a role in a team that had seemingly, at least at that moment, turned their season around?
Yeah, mostly good guys. I mean, Jim Leonard was on that team, too.
Yep,
he was a smart guy. I mean, you always marveled at the fact that he looks like he's 12 on the field wearing a helmet. He was that little. But as smart a guy as you're going to talk to, knew the defense, a good lead by example, not by words. There weren't many vocal guys on that defense. I don't think either side of the ball, come to think of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was going to say, really, my thought was not quite ready for prime time. You didn't have guys that were comfortable standing up in front of a camera and, just kind of laying it out for you. Whatever that might be, like, calling the team out, after a bad loss or saying the right thing at just the right moment to try and, motivate his teammates. This wasn't that kind of a group. And
that was one thing I think, would you say that getting rid of Takeo Spikes, I mean, you talk about a guy that's vocal.
And Fletcher, and
Fletcher too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Marshawn Lynch suffers a high ankle sprain in that win, over Miami. So he is not in their Week 11 game, this time on Sunday Night Football against the New England Patriots. And where everything in the Cowboys game was seemingly going right, only to have it all fall apart, in this one there's no talk of things going right in this game for the Bills against New England.
You got to back this up to the week before because this game had been flex, okay? So prior to the Dolphins game, the thinking in Buffalo was we have this game against an 0-8 team that would make us 5-4, and then we would have an opportunity to play on prime time in front of the Patriots on Sunday night. Don't screw up this Dolphins game so we can have a fun week and enjoy the run-up to the Patriots game. So that happens. And that week was as exciting as I can ever remember outside of 2004, the end of the season, in Buffalo. Again, Sunday night, I think maybe one or two times the Bills have played on Sunday Night Football during this era. They've got the Patriots coming to town. It was a party. Everyone was jacked up the whole week. And even game day, I mean, NBC was showing shots of Bills fans celebrating here and parties going on here and tailgates happening here. And everyone was jacked up for that game. And then it was over in like a second.
I was going to say, this just in, the Patriots just scored again. Right. And that was the thing. Look, you know it, everyone knows it. The Patriots were in the Bills' heads at that point. There was no way they were going to beat that team, especially the way the Patriots were playing at that point. They were unstoppable, at least until the very end.
And before the season, in my fantasy league, I remember we had a mega keeper league. So we had like 60 guys that we kept. And Randy Moss, with the top 60 guys off the table, still went like 7th in the first round. And I picked him, and even as I picked him, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I hope this works out well. So that first half, I didn't go to the game.
It worked out pretty well.
Well, yeah. So I'm in the sports office, and part of me wouldn't mind seeing Buffalo win because that would be a great story. But if New England's going to win, I want to see Randy Moss go off. 4 touchdowns in the first half was pretty good. I spent that whole first half just cackling in the front office, like, this is unbelievable. I'm winning a game just on this one guy. It's great.
Right. The fantasy points were off the chart.
Oh.
Yeah, the Patriots are coming out of their bye week for this Sunday night game, and I think back to my own memories in 07, as a junior at BU, and just you'd go into HDH, and my job was to log these games. So somewhere in some computer are these intricate logs of every play from the 07 season that I did, and I mean, I just Brady to Moss, 50 yards. And you can even look now, I mean, it's online, their touchdown chart from the 07 season. How many, I think they had something like 24 touchdowns of 30 yards or more. I mean, it was just ridiculous just how well this Patriots team was playing. And of course, against the Bills, a mediocre at best Bills team on a nationally televised game. And pretty much every Patriots game in the second half of the season is nationally televised because is this team going to go 16-0 in the regular season? Well, Tom Brady has basically a perfect game of football. 31 of 39, 373 yards, 5 touchdowns. The Patriots Tom Brady has 38 passing touchdowns in 10 games. This is unheard of at this time.
I think he had 6 incompletions in that game, and the Bills, whoever the quarterback was, had 10 completions. So, I mean, he almost had to make.
It was a Losman game,
It was. You had to marvel at it. And The Patriots were upset from the Spygate controversy from the year before, so they were piling it on everybody. That was the third game in a row they scored more than 49. They were going for fourth downs. They were doing everything. And,
Even Kyle Eckel is catching touchdowns in this game.
Even as much as someone who covers the Bills and really has no interest in seeing the Patriots win all the time, you had to just sit back and marvel at how
No, you knew you were watching something special.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's fair. I think you realized this was a team playing at a level that we hadn't seen prior to that point, and all anybody was thinking about was, could they go all the way? Could they run the table, make Mercury Morris cry and go undefeated?
And then it started long before Week 11, too. I mean, this wasn't a brand new thing in Buffalo,
Right.
Yeah, I remember even early in that season, I think they played against Miami. And I remember in the sports office in Boston thinking, I'm an intern, so I'm just fresh eye, just taking everything in. And the guys in the office who are, who had been there, some of them for a long time, were just like, we're watching an unbelievable team. They were so giddy about it. And as an intern, you just were like, okay, yeah, man, this is awesome. This is so cool to watch all this. Well, and you mentioned Randy Moss. He has 10 catches for 128 yards. He has 4 touchdowns in the first half.
Yeah.
And one of them, the first one, I believe, is his longest one. I don't have the yardage in front of me, but just he burns McGahee and then George Wilson on the same play. And Randy Moss is just doing this, wide open in the back of the end zone. I would think if you're Perry Fuel or anyone in the Bills defensive staff, make sure you're on 81.
Yeah.
Don't let him out of your sight at all.
They could have put the whole secondary. They didn't have anybody that could stay with a guy like Randy Moss. I mean, that was a guy.
He's a foot and a half taller than McGahee anyway.
Right. It was a total mismatch from the word go, and the Patriots scored at will that night.
Patriots win 56-10. It is the most lopsided loss in Bills history, and there are a lot of losses to choose from. 46 points is the most. Week 12, the Bills go on the road to Jacksonville. Still no Marshawn Lynch. The Bills never led in this game. This was another blowout game. Jaguars are good this season. Bills lose 36-14, so they're now back under 500. Week 13, the Bills go on the road to Washington. And in the lead up to that game, on the Monday before that game, Washington safety Sean Taylor, shot in his home during a robbery, would then succumb to those injuries, would pass away from those injuries the following day. Another week where the lead up to it and the discussion is about something totally removed from the football field, I would imagine.
It was unbelievable how many times the Bills were involved in that year. It was only 2, but, 2 major,
tragedies,
life-changing events, obviously, and life-taking
And at
events.
2 ends of the spectrum, too.
Exactly, yeah.
In
terms of, different guys, different situations. So it was just crazy to think about Buffalo being involved in that again. And, my favorite memory from that game is that the Redskins came out on the first play and played with 10 men on the field in honor of Sean Taylor. The Bills were aware of it, and I think they ran some sort of safe. Everybody was in on that honor, that point of making that note, and for the Bills to play along. Not that it was a long stretch to expect them to do that. Was something that I thought was a great show of sportsmanship, and it made you proud to be someone who was associated, in our case, covering the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, he was so good. He was such a great football player, and it was shocking. There aren't a lot of stories of athletes sort of in that moment while they're playing being shot and killed, and I think it had everybody just sort of in a daze, in terms of trying to process, how did this happen? What is this all about? And in the end, I don't know from a competitive standpoint how it ultimately influenced the game, but it certainly cast a pall over it, if you will.
I remember just a few months earlier, that was the year that Sean Taylor lit up Brian Mormon in the Pro Bowl. It was the same calendar year.
That's right.
Derek Dockery played with Sean Taylor for 3 years, called him one of the greatest teammates ever. The Washington defense holds the Bills without a touchdown. But in this game, Ryan Lindell, 4 for 4. The Bills, it's a tightly contested game, not a lot of points. Hall of Fame coach Joe Gibbs calls a timeout late in that game to ice Ryan Lindell, then tries to do it again, which you can't do in the NFL. It's not college. You can't ice a kicker multiple times. So a 15-yard unsportsmanlike penalty sets up the Bills significantly closer. Lindell bangs in a 36-yard field goal as time expires. So you talk about this pall being casted over this game, and now you have a Hall of Fame coach making a mistake that you just Joe Gibbs doesn't make a mistake.
I think that was the moment Joe Gibbs decided that I need to do racing football.
Yeah.
That's he was done with. I remember when he got hired by Washington again, John Kutchko and I had a deal where if anything big, this is pre-internet, pre-Twitter, all this stuff, or pre-instant information, where if anything big like that happened, to call each other any time of day, home number, cell phone, anything. So when Joe Gibbs got hired, that qualified. I remember sitting out in the parking lot at midnight after the show. That's when the news broke. And I called him at home, and he kind of rolled out of bed. What? Joe Gibbs? Really? Now he's up and he's into it. Totally, you know. But the second era of Joe Gibbs in Washington, you know, didn't work out. And I think that might have been the moment where he said, "I'm done."
Yeah, Bills win that game 17-16 to go to 6-7.
I would say a couple things about that game that stand out in my memory, and fans may remember this. You know, Trent played that day. He had a big pass to Josh Reed that was part of that drive that set up that field goal at the end of the game. And it was like a third down or like a third and long, and they had to convert it. And he, you know, like they needed like 16 yards or something. He got like 20 or 25. And that was one of those moments where you thought, maybe this guy has a little bit of that moxie, you know, that we've been missing at that position. A guy that can make a play to set a team up to win a football game. The other thing that happened in that game, we talked about him during the preseason, was Fred Jackson got into that game and made some big plays down the stretch too. And I remember thinking, you know what, they need to give this guy some more opportunities.
It was a first down play, but Trent Edwards hit Josh Reed for 30 yards, and that got him into field goal range with. It was 27 seconds to go, so there wasn't.
So maybe
it
wasn't the down, it was the yardage
and the time of the game
right.
too. I mean, if you throw a 5-yard pass over the middle there with 27 seconds, you're not going to have another shot.
They needed that play, and he was able to make it.
In Week 14 against Miami, Fred Jackson runs for 115 yards. So you talk about a guy the following week, a guy that's getting opportunities and making the most of it. Here's Fred Jackson, and that's the perfect lead into the following week's game. After that win in Washington, as the Bills host the Dolphins. The Dolphins were 0-12. But Fred Jackson and Marshawn Lynch each run for over 100 yards in that game.
Yep.
And, I guess at this point that kind of confirms those early feelings that you felt in preseason that this guy might be, I don't know that he's Marshawn Lynch. He's obviously not the bellwether running back you just drafted. But this guy looks pretty damn good, too.
That's where the Bills that was the first time in a long time where you kind of felt like the Bills had an offensive identity that could intimidate teams. Maybe not every team, but a lot of teams. They could go run Lynch, run Jackson, Trent Edwards just doesn't screw it up, and you can win games with a decent defense. And you felt coming out of that game that, all right, if the Bills are going to make a run, this is how they're going to do it. And there was some optimism that they could pull that off.
I would agree with that, absolutely.
So the Bills win this game against the Dolphins to go 7-6. They've won 6 games out of their last 8.
Right.
And, 7-6 is not a great record, but you're alive for the playoffs.
You're in the mix.
You're in the hunt on the graphic, going into the month of December. Then they go to Cleveland, where it was a blizzard, and just like in that Patriots game, but on the total opposite spectrum, everything still goes wrong.
That my favorite game that I did not go to.
8-0
all the Bills games, yes. Even more than the 6-3 game, which I also did not have to go to. But that was a total disaster weather-wise. I mean, it was windy, it was snowy.
Yep.
You could barely function. People who were there, there's probably about 100,000 people now that claim they were at that game. And, Phil Dawson in that game hits like a 50-yard field goal.
That's right.
That at the time, I said, this is better than the Vinatieri kick in the snow game for the playoffs. It was an unbelievable kick. But Buffalo could do nothing. Cleveland went in front, and looking back on that game, even while you're watching the second half, you kind of felt like whoever got the first points, any points, 2-0, was going to win the game.
First 8-0 game in the NFL since 1929. The Bills on offense, 7 punts, 2 turnovers on downs. Mormon has a fumble recovered in the end zone, or fallen on in the end zone for a safety. Browns win 8-0. The Bills officially eliminated from the playoffs. 8-0, also their first shutout loss since the 31-0 loss in Week 17 to end 2003. So, all right, that's another year. This is now 8 consecutive seasons without the playoffs. And I guess, the immediate aftermath of knowing that, all right, there's still 2 games left, and once again, the Bills are not going to the postseason.
It was frustrating, but not unexpected. They didn't have a quarterback. You didn't know anything about their running back. Their defense had lost major pieces. You were relying on rookies. You started 1-4. The fact that the Bills still had something to play for in mid-December kind of felt like a win. I mean, really, coming out of that game, you had the Fred Jackson is revealed. Trent Edwards shows some promise. The defense isn't terrible. You had found a way to 7-6. You've gotten literally smothered by a blizzard to knock you out of the playoffs. There was some optimism coming out of that season, relatively, for the Bills.
Yeah, I think at that point, my thought was, bring on the Winter Classic.
Yes,
which was about 2 weeks away. Yeah. I will say there's a footnote to it, and that, has always stayed with me. They ended up playing the Giants the following week.
Yes, and I was going to get to that.
Okay, so you were. I mean, that was a real sort of turning point for both franchises.
Sure was.
Yeah.
And that was a strange day. Weather-wise, it started out well and got progressively worse, and obviously the game played out in the exact same fashion.
Yeah, December 23rd, Week 16, the Bills host the Giants. Kevin Everett in attendance, and considering all of the scary news you heard in the immediate aftermath of his injury, to see him I don't know that he was on the field, but in the building, in the Ralph, after everything it had gone through, I mean, just the biggest surprise to end all surprises, right?
Right, and they played the message up on the video board, and the place just went bonkers. That was your Christmas present for Bills fans that year. That this guy who was literally laying paralyzed on the field at Ralph Wilson Stadium in September is standing on his own 2 feet in December, 2 days before Christmas, wishing the best and thanking Bills fans.
It was something
What
nice
a
to
moment.
talk about. Yeah, it kind of covered up the fact the Bills weren't going to the playoffs. Things on the field hadn't gone the way you wanted. It was a great way to go into the holiday season and feel good about the team.
Maybe not necessarily the game, though.
No.
No, and again, the footnote is that
Yeah.
that game was crucial for the
It
Giants.
sure was.
They had to have that game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were down 14-0.
They were down 21-17 going into the fourth.
Yeah.
I think the Giants talked about that game as being the start of what springboarded them to ended up winning the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
because the Giants needed to win this game and probably get help the following week against the Patriots to get into the
They
playoffs.
did, and they ended up losing to the Patriots
Sure
the following
did.
week
But they were
in a great game.
They were in the playoffs, though. That game,
That-
when they played that game against New England that night, it meant nothing to either
Correct.
team except for 16-0.
Correct. But you take that, if things had gone differently in Buffalo, who knows how the script ends.
The Giants have to look at that Buffalo game as we have to win this game because we're not winning the other game
Correct.
because it's the 15-0 team.
21-17 going into the fourth. Edwards throws a pick six. Ahmad Bradshaw has an 88-yard touchdown.
That's right.
Then Edwards throws another pick six as the Giants win 38-21. And it's not obviously the moment or anything like that, but you talk about moments of the drought where everything falls apart for the Bills so quickly. And just those 3 plays, pick six, 88-yard touchdown, another pick six. It's the dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, that little just horn on the end of it that just adds that extra layer of embarrassment for this team as they drop to 7-8 and
Again, bring on the Winter Classic.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
literally covered the field after that game and started prepping for the Winter Classic.
Week 17, the Bills in Philadelphia, a totally
matter.
forgotten game. Eagles win 17-9. So the Bills end the season of 2007, 7-9. Their offense ranked 30th in the NFL. Their defense ranked 31st based on yardage. Edwards 5-4-0 as a starter. Losman 2-5-0 as a starter.
Yeah.
Combined, they don't even get to 3,000 yards. Marshawn Lynch looks pretty good. Over 1,100 yards for the season, 7 touchdowns. Lee Evans, 850 yards receiving. But not a very good season on either sides of the ball.
No, and
the defense was okay, but the offense stunk.
In my other down and out appearance, or down and drought appearance, I talked about Lee Evans. And to me, this season is sort of a microcosm of his career in Buffalo. He had decent numbers on a terrible team. If he had been on just a bit of a better team, he could have had, this could have been the prime of his career with exceptional numbers. And instead you get 55 catches, 849 yards, 15.4 a pop, and 5 touchdowns. Okay, decent numbers, but he could have been so much more.
And we talked about the Patriots and how explosive they were. The Bills combined from their quarterbacks threw 11 touchdowns for the whole season. I don't
know that I knew that.
Game by game, Trent Edwards. There was some optimism with him, but you look at the numbers, and he was over 180 yards twice in 10 games he played that season. There were 11 for 20s and 10 for 25s and 130, 140. 2 picks, 3 picks. It just the numbers were never. And this is how the Bills got into this long stretch where no one ever threw for 300 yards in a Buffalo uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Were there thoughts in the just coming out of that 07 season? We had talked about it in 05 and again with 06 of where is this team going? What are we doing? What was that thought like at the end of 07 after another season without the playoffs?
I think you felt good about the running game. You felt like that they could run the ball with Lynch and with Jackson. There was something there.
But that's been a trait throughout the drought.
Right. Well,
they could run.
It wasn't different. The one thing they couldn't figure out. The
New
quarterback,
faces, though. And that's the difference this time.
Trent Edwards was one of those too. He's a rookie, he's
I
a
would
third
agree.
rounder.
Yeah, I would
you
agree.
don't expect a third rounder to come in and blow anyone away. He did not. come close to that. But they're okay. This is a guy that if you get a third-round quarterback that can be functional in an offense, and he was certainly that, you feel like, okay, we can go into next year and see if maybe he gets better.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was quite a season in 2007. So moving forward, just this team once again has more question marks with their front office because the era of the Golden Boys looks like it's going to be coming to an end as reports right at the end of the season that Marv Levy planning to step down as general manager of the Buffalo Bills. So what will happen going into 2008? For that, the next episode of Down and Drought.